Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature successful business leaders, top law firms, green energy companies, and more. Today, we're joined by the author of The Life You're Made For, Dr. Heather Penny. Dr. Penny, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so good to be here, Matthew.
So good to have you. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlynx.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until the hacker does whatever bad deed they came to do. With CyberLynx intrusion detection, you'll know if a hacker finds a way past your security before they can do harm. Find out more at cyberlynx.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. All right, Dr. Penny, I just finished your book yesterday. Absolutely loved it. The Life You're Made For, Finding Clarity, Confidence, and Courage to Be Fully Alive. Really fantastic. Can you tell us what the kind of inspiration for your book is here? Because it was actually, I'll leave it at that. Inspiration for your book.
Yes, I'd love to. So what I wrote the book for was all the years I've been doing coaching, and I wasn't able to take on any more clients at the time. And so I just decided, how do I make almost this life manual for people to feel like they have a coach in their corner? So I created the book. I created a workbook that goes with it called the Coaching Companion. And then I also did an e-course where I have like a 5-minute video where you can feel like you have me, Dr. Heather Penny, in your corner as a coach, because I wanted people to feel like they can be empowered to really increase their own clarity, to build their own confidence and engage their own courage. And many of us don't know we can do that. We want to do that. We want to believe we can do that. And it really originated from my research in my doctorate program, where I was reading all of this research about our society as a whole is spiraling down. Higher levels of depression, higher levels of anxiety. I'm telling you, I was getting so depressed reading the research. So I finally thought, I want to do my research not on how we're spiraling down, but I want to start doing our research on how do we start spiraling up. There are people that know how to spiral up. Let me go and ask the questions on the positive side of the research so that, and this is just logic to me, if we can spiral down, we can honestly learn how to also do the coping skills to spiral up. Many of us, we're just thrilled if we can just spiral up and get to our plateau again. What I want to do is help people to go, yeah, once you've gotten stabilized your plateau, you can actually reach higher and higher levels of potential once you learn how to do it. So I've created these 3 baskets of clarity, confidence, courage, so that you can feel like you can start spiraling up to higher levels in life.
I love that. And I completely agree. It makes perfect sense. And I think that is why you see, kind of, I don't want to say winners win and losers lose, but once you get on that path and you're doing those things, you've got the courage and the confidence. These things, they help you to achieve more. As you're saying, it kind of spirals up, right? And I want to dive into that, but before I do, I'm struck by did in your research, was there a reason why did you find a reason why we're spiraling? People are tending to spiral down so much now?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when we can understand why we're spiraling down, we can kind of flip it and begin to do the opposite of that. So for instance, we had lessened areas of clarity, and what was blocking our clarity was a lot of our belief system. So for instance, and in my book, the confidence section is all about what we believe. Clarity is about what we know. Confidence is about what we believe. Courage is about how we take action. What I'm trying to show is that sometimes we get a little clarity, but we then don't know how to address our confidence and our belief levels. And then we really don't know how to take action. So sometimes we might be doing well with one of them. What I want people to feel is that perfect trifecta. Once you get your clarity, you got to go after your confidence, which is associated with your mindset and what you're believing. And then you got to start separating out what is false beliefs, like I don't have what it takes, or who am I for someone to hire me as the new business owner, or I don't know what to do in this next situation. I never will know what to do. I mean, I started listing all of these false beliefs I hear in my coaching work with people that are much more common than we realize. And then, of course, some of this pop psychology says, well, just chant 100 times, I'm enough, I'm enough, I'm enough. I want to go after that misnomer, because what we're seeing in the studies is it's actually making us more depressed.
Isn't
So
that something?
So I want to say, hey, it's not enough just to say I'm enough when you're dealing with feeling inferior or not enough. You want to say, yeah, I believe I'm enough. I want to anchor it in something that feels true to me. Then I want to take action steps because that's going to reinforce the confidence and then the clarity.
Well, let's if we can dive into that, let's go with the confidence, right? You don't feel like you're confident, like that you're, I think you said, enough in something. And I'm gonna just say, let's say that somebody feels, hey, I'm really not that good at my job. I'm not, doing. I'm not enough to get promoted and succeed in this, right? And that creates all sorts of kind of negative, lots of things. What's your advice there? How do they go about stopping that and changing the direction of that spiral?
Well, let me give you just honestly a typical example I deal with. I
Yeah.
work with a lot of leaders and high achievers, and then they'll whisper stuff to me. Like, we're all insecure at the chorus level, is what I want to tell everybody. And I want to say it's okay. It's just okay. The more we can be truthful about it, the more that we will be set free to move into our mindset that we need. So one of the most common ones I'm hearing is I'm not a good communicator or I'm not a good public speaker. Now, this could be someone, middle management or CEO of a company. Oftentimes I will say, all right, let's check that belief. It goes back to someone told them that, or they started telling themselves that. And the reality is, every human being is an effective communicator. We just all have our own styles. So, for instance, if I'm getting you ready to public speak, do you need an outline? Do you need an intro? Do you need support on just creating the talking points? It's might be structure related. It might be more of just, I don't know how to transition from one topic to another, or I don't want to speak to this whole thing. I'll say, you don't have to speak to the whole thing. You're the CEO of the company. Introduce it for 2 minutes and hand it over to your COO. Or you're not supposed to have to know everything. Maybe it's an insecurity around the topic. But what do? We lump it all into, I'm not a good communicator. I'm not a good public speaker.
That's a great point. I mean, a lot of time, I think that people inaccurately assess things like that. They'll take something like, hey, very specifically, I may be uncomfortable with how much information I have on a topic, right? And then they kind of translate that insecurity into something much bigger. And I think when people think say things that are so general, like I'm not a good this, and they start labeling. Once you start labeling yourself, those labels are hard to manage, right? So and I'm not going to say depressed because that's a clinical thing, but when you slap on labels for something, maybe you're just sad, and if you slap on a label like you're depressed, now you've made it a much bigger thing. Or like you were saying, maybe you just need a little structure to your talk. So I think that's really important. What are some of the kind of tools and tricks and tips that would you give somebody when it comes to getting that confidence, or maybe better understanding what the actual issue is?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a lot, wasn't it?
I'm sorry. It was like, well, that's a big question, because
That's
I'm
a
like,
huge question.
if it were easy, we'd all be doing it. So I guess I just want to say, okay, everybody, if it were be easy, we'd all be doing it. But let me see if I can tackle it, Matthew, just for the sake of the audience, so you can feel this permission to start exploring new areas, to start understanding what we're believing. A lot of times it takes a trusted outside source to say that. So I'm thinking of right now, a CEO that I worked with, and she said, I'm not a good communicator. Well, I started digging a little deeper, and it wasn't that she wasn't a good communicator. She was told by other key influencers in her life that she was a bad communicator, and she started believing it. The reality is she was really whip smart. She was super intelligent. She was too fast to process her, and her audience wasn't keeping up with her. And so she started believing the fact that she was an ineffective communicator. All I did was teach her. I'm like, oh, you just have to slow down. They can't handle 10 points, but they can handle 3. So pick your top 3. Once we just started slowing down her processing and understanding how to read the room, her communication went through the roof. But because she didn't know that basic awareness about her own intellect and how it was actually overwhelming her listeners, she didn't know how to engage with her people. So I think you're always checking your beliefs, and whether you do it with a formal source like a coach, a mentor, a counselor, whatever, or whether you do it with an informal source like a mentor and a trusted friend, I would encourage you to start checking your beliefs with people and asking them, does this sound true? Because usually we all know, no, that's not true, Heather. You could do something totally different. And what you're telling yourself is actually the barrier that we're doing. So let's take it over to sadness or depression, or like you said, it's clinical. So we're not going to try and say a thought process is going to change a clinical diagnosis. But at the same hand, I want to go after that and say, are we depressed? There may be another option, that truly we are spiraling down because our thought process is telling us over and over and over again, I don't matter. I don't count. I can't measure up. Nobody's going to want to listen to me. I don't have what it takes to lead this company, this group, this parent, this kid, whatever it is, we're facing that challenge in life. And it usually takes an outside source that says, you have what it takes. Let's help get it into smaller bite-sized pieces. But wouldn't we all feel really depressed and sad and anxious if that's our mind thought process and no one is helping us stop that process and helping us shift into some true beliefs of, I get to take this moment by moment, or I get to trust the process, or I get to believe that I have what it takes. These aren't just nice little things that we're reaching for to help make us feel better. It truly is an anchor that helps us from slippering and sliding down the slippery slope into just a darkness that we can't manage life. All of us at some point have had to grapple with that. That's what being human means.
Yeah, no, I really like that, because I think it's the kind of self-talk is so very important. And I don't think people give it enough weight. And they may feel that those are very accurate things, and they're not doing damage when they say things like, well, I'm just not a good public speaker. Right. And I get this a lot from some of my employees. And I'm like, that's not true at all. You got to stop saying things like that. If you're saying something negative, first of all, there's just no benefit to it. If you can identify that, oh, hey, I struggle with this particular thing, and then let's address that particular thing, but don't label yourself as bad at this and say, it's funny because sometimes I'll hear people say things like, oh, I'm so stupid. I'm like, you should never say that. Like, that's it. And they don't think twice about it. Like they just say it, and they're like, oh, I didn't mean it like that. But didn't you? I think you did. And that's the problem. And then you've just kind of normalized that. And so you believe it on some level. And so it just, so how, it's one thing to address it individually and say, hey, okay, cool. You stop saying that because it kind of, you're damaging yourself. Let's address that individual thing. So I think, as you approach things like courage and confidence, and do you start with self-talk, and is it really just getting that sage advice from a trusted confidant, a coach, somebody who from the outside can see it more clearly? Is that the approach? Is that?
Yeah, for someone who likes to get results like me, and I am a high achiever, I do say, go hire a coach. Go hire someone that can hear your self-talks, because you'll get faster results. And I don't know about you, but I don't like spending a lot of time trying to address it myself when I could actually get help from somebody else. And I did my own coaching, which I love it. A lot of people ask me, what do I need to do to be certified as a coach and all these different things? I go, all that good stuff is great. I definitely encourage education and learning, but the best education and learning you can get is go hire a coach and work with a coach for a while. And I still remember a question that haunts me when I hired my own coach. I was hum-hawing about moving forward and actually starting my own coaching company. And this was about 15 years ago. My coach at the time just said to me, why are you hesitating? I did not like that question. He called me out. He said, you're hesitating. Why? Because I was grappling with the false belief of, what if I fail? What if nobody wants to hire me? And I didn't want to say it out loud. I feel very confident, but I'm like, I'm scared half to death. I'm leaving a very secure position. I'm leaving a tenured track. as a university professor. I'm leaving all of this and daring to go start out myself and go and pay for my own PhD. What if I fail? What do you think why I'm hesitating?
Well, I think that's great because I think that's such a huge jump to go and start something like that. It'd be one thing if you started coaching because it turns out you had just kind of naturally acquired 10 or 15 clients and now you've got all these clients and you're coaching them and you're like, well, I should probably start a business around this.
Yeah.
But to take that leap, can we jump into that? Because I really like we love founder stories on the show. We talk about them all the time. I think they're really interesting. And I think in this particular case, diving into the psychology of that, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, your jump, it was likely a lot larger psychologically than most. Or it would be like that inventor who starts, it's like they've got an idea for something. They know it can be done, but to go and say, I'm going to quit my job. I've got this invention that I haven't even invented yet fully, and I'm going to go do it. And then I'm going to sell it to people and I'm going to be able to make a living on this. Okay. That takes some serious confidence. So if you could, can you tell us your founding story? How?
Sure. Yeah, I was in education. I started out as a teacher, my first early years as a little third grade teacher, and then moved into university work and working as a university professor at several different universities. And I had my master's in leadership and I was training educators and I could feel something was missing. I had probably a third grader and a fifth grader at the time, my own kids. I'm in a marriage with a man that I want to stay married with. So I want this quality of life factor as well. But I could feel this pull. I want to do something different. Basically, I wasn't living the life that I was made for, and I knew it deep down. So when we talk about courage, it's the courage to ask the hard question that we have no answer for. So if I could put it in a courage question that I really finally put out there is, how do I go after the life that I'm truly made for? And P.S., what is it? So, and I used to joke, like, I know what I don't want to do. So I started interviewing a lot of these different spaces. And I remember sitting in the interview going, oh, I want to like this job. I want to like, I should like this job. But I felt myself just saying, nah, it just wasn't at all where I wanted to be. And it made me start getting really nervous because I was feeling like I couldn't find my passion again and I couldn't find my fire. Looking back, what I'm realizing was my clarity was evolving into a different level of potential. The only thing I could get it down to was I want to teach what I want to teach on. I'm a really good teacher. I'm just tired of teaching on everybody else's subject matter. Tired of teaching about curriculum and instruction and student development and 3-paragraph essays. I was just tired of teaching on that. And I thought, I've refined the craft of teaching. I just want to teach what I want to teach on. And I know how to get results and I know how people learn and grow. So at that point in my life, I never even heard of coaching, really. I just vaguely heard of it. I went to a coaching course, loved the guy, and I went up to the instructor afterwards, said, can I hire you? Worked with him for about a year. And it was during that time when he finally said, have you thought about starting your own coaching company? And I thought, well, now I have. No, I did not. And again, it was talk about an outside source. It was someone who was competent and successful in his field who noticed the potential in me, or maybe my false belief was, I can't be a coach like you. I mean, you're really good. I mean, you're teaching coaching courses. Who am I? And dare I whisper to you, hey, I'd like to be a coach like you. Too much vulnerability there, right? So for him to call me out and say, you'd be really good at this. Well, then my overachiever in me was like, well, if I'm going to be good at this, I want to be great. I'm going to go and get my PhD on this. So my PhD focus is all about how people change and learn and grow. That was another huge leap of faith because I left the university systems, which usually helps pay for all these things, right? Yep. Took out a loan, and just said, okay, I'm going all in. I'm just jumping in. It was by my second year of my coaching where I started moving into corporate coaching and I was able to pay off everything. My biggest fear was I would invest everything and nobody would hire me. I was like, I'm just going to be a barista at Starbucks. Oh my gosh, with a PhD. That's your worst fear, right? Reality is that I had to combat a lot of false beliefs which is that book, The Life You're Made For, is really what I lived through to get to a much higher level of the life that I feel like I've made for, even though I couldn't define it. It was like this journey of faith in myself and in the process, and even my own higher power that I believe is out there calling me to something, and being able to step in that space and say, I'm going to dare because I've got one life. And if I don't take this risk, I will always regret it. But I'm not going to do it silly or stupid or, irrational or lack of critical thinking. I'm going to do it in a very systematic way. Hire my own coach, get my own PhD, focus on a program that'll help me move into the area of study that I want to talk about, that will eventually help me write the book I want to write for people to feel empowered to get their own clarity, their own confidence, their own courage. I couldn't even call it clarity, confidence, or courage at the time. All I would have called it was something like, so that you can move forward in your life.
Be successful.
Be successful. Yay.
Yeah. Go win.
Yeah.
Well, so let's look at that fear that you had. That I guess my question is that it's not like that was a baseless fear that out of nowhere. That was an actual kind of risk potential. The potential for that to happen was X, right? There was a possibility that could be an outcome.
Yeah.
So, if you're kind of weighing the pros and cons, and you're looking at this as a purely business decision, and trying to analyze it, that would have been one of the risks, right? But for you that you kind of manifested, and I think for every human being, that would naturally manifest into a fear of, oh shit, what happens if this thing happened? If the worst case scenario is kerplooey, I embarrass myself and I waste all my money and I make no money and have no clients. So how did you manage that?
That's good.
How did you manage that?
I'm glad you're asking me that, because I need to be asked that. You're scared a lot, but I appealed to myself logically, saying, you can either go through this terrified the whole time, or you can start trying to just hang on to a true belief. So for me, I remember during that season of, my true belief was, I'm made for more, and it's okay that I don't know what it is. See, so it's not this like rainbow and unicorn. I can fly to the moon and I'm amazing. It's grounded still. I'm made for more, and it's okay. I don't know what it is. Then as I got a little bit more into, and I graduated, and I thought, okay, I've got my degree. Now what? I get to start teaching what I want to teach on and trust that the audience is there. I've learned the craft of teaching. I know how people learn and grow. I get to trust that someone out there needs what I'm offering. I get to trust that I'm being led and guided. And there were times when I would write it on a Post-it and stick it on my mirror, because you have good days and bad days in the middle of these things. And I think one of the saddest things with the human story is when we quit on the bad days. I just hope that I can be there for people when they're on the bad days, because sometimes you just need one person helping you believe in a true belief that, wait a minute, I am made for more. Wait a minute, I am being led and guided. Wait a minute, I do get to trust the process. Wait a minute, I just get to take one step today. That's it, one step. Tomorrow I'll take another step. So it's like whatever you're grappling with, that false belief of, I have to know everything, I need to have all the answers, all these false beliefs, you try and flip it on its end and try and grab onto a true belief that counteracts that false belief that is trying to take you out.
Now, when you use a term like true belief, would you say, is that synonymous with, say, a larger purpose, right?
Yeah.
Because for you, you're saying like you want to, your true belief was that you were meant for something more.
Right.
That is almost like there's a larger purpose, a larger destiny. Some people might say, God's got a plan. Some people might say the universe will help, me get to wherever I'm, wherever I want to be, as long as I can make that clear. We're kind of deal. And that there's a lot of different takes on this whole thing. But is that what you're saying with a true belief? You're not just saying believing something that's true, because you're now having to believe something that you're not sure is true, right? So it makes this whole thing, which is really interesting, because you can't, right? But I guess that's part of where belief comes in. So it's really interesting. But then you did have a higher purpose for yourself, a
Yeah.
larger purpose. So kind of a mission that you got
Yes.
to believe in that drove you, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is really
Yeah.
fascinating because but
Mhm.
yours came from one of self. You're saying it comes from a self belief,
Yeah.
right? A believing in yourself that you can do it, which I think for whatever reason, I think entrepreneurs tend to have that.
Yeah.
We tend to defy like we don't tend to think, oh, I couldn't do it, right? We're like,
Mhm.
nobody's ever done it before, but if somebody can, I can freaking do it. I'm gonna do it. Like it can be done,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's like I'm
Yeah.
not gonna worry about. Yeah, there's a million things that can go wrong, but you know what? As long as I'm in the driver's seat, we're gonna avoid all the potholes. We're gonna take the crazy S turns.
Yep.
We'll get there. I know there's gonna be bad weather. There's gonna be good weather, but we're gonna keep driving till we get there. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs tend to have that.
Mhm.
And it's really, but hearing your take on that true belief, I think that's really fascinating. I'd love to kind of dive into that a little bit more for you because I think
Sure.
outside of just the entrepreneurial community, I think even within it, there are aspects of that where people wonder it could use more of that, I guess, is what I'm getting
Right.
to. That where does
Right.
that come from? Can you dive into it a little bit more? Because I think that true belief, as you call it, is a
Yeah.
really interesting topic.
I think all of us have to come to a moment of facing what we want to believe. I don't ever want to oversimplify it. And I'm very respectful of saying what maybe my true belief or my false belief is not yours. So I always own my own. And even when I work with clients, I just say, well, let's check with what you believe. And then usually people understand what's limiting them and they'll say, I'm so tired of this limiting me. I'm so tired of not believing in myself to be able to start my own company. That's the weariness that I was dealing with and grappling with personally. What was I scared of? Everything. Like I'm more on the human side. So to actually think about starting a business, that terrified me. And then I had to realize, wait a minute, I have what it takes to start a business. And the areas that I don't know, like the finance side, I'll hire a CPA. I'll hire a bookkeeper. I'll hire, I'll start an S Corp. But now I have a very successful S Corp. But I'm looking at this and I'm like, that's not stuff I would have known early on. What did I know? I knew teaching. What did I not know? All the finance stuff and all the business stuff. That's what scared me. Some of you listening might say, I know the finance side, but I don't know the human side. It doesn't matter. There's something that's going to scare you when you're starting something new that you don't know about. And you have to have some level of belief or even faith. And to your point earlier, I literally had to write like on one side of my journal, these are all the things scaring me. And for heaven's sakes, I'm sick of it. It's like the monster under the bed. And then you're like, I'm done. I'm going to yank this monster out of the bed, underneath the bed. And I'm declaring this monster done in my life. And I'm going to start daring to believe I have what it takes to start a company. Do I know what I'm doing? No. Do I have a business plan? I don't have a business plan. These are all things that I learned to start doing and that came when I started leaning into the true belief that said, I have what it takes to take one step towards starting my company today. The other thing, too, that really hit me is this level of faith. And we use this word a lot, and I am a person of faith, but, it's not just the religious piece. It's like faith in yourself, faith in the process, faith in the people that will come around you. That was a true belief I had to start really calling out. What was my false belief? I'm all alone. Nobody's going to help me figure this out. I had to start creating and really reaching for a true belief so I wouldn't spiral down. The right people will come when I need them. When the teacher is ready, or when the student is ready, the teacher will come, that old proverb.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I had the faith in my higher power, which I call God. So for me, faith is much more comprehensive. And I feel like, no, I'm not the type that just wishes on a star, says a prayer, and flicks it out there to the universe. I'm the type that says, I got to show up. And I got to be engaged with my own level of faith. What am I having faith in? I got to have faith in myself. I got to have some faith in the process. I got to have faith in others. And I have to have faith in my higher power that's calling me to something bigger.
This is really interesting because I think we scientifically, faith is a thing that we've done a lot. There's been lots of studies, and then we've proven that faith is a very powerful force, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wherever you apply it. And I love this, I think it was a Harvard study where they did it with the rats in the pool. Have you heard this one?
No.
They put two rats in a pool, and it might have been more than two, but I believe it was two. They put rats in a pool, and they drowned within, but they stopped swimming within 15 minutes. Then they'd rescue the rats, and then what they found was if they just gave up, right? They stopped swimming. They're like, it's never coming. I can't get out of here, and they give up. But then when they take the rats, and then they before 15 minutes comes up, they rescue them at like 13 minutes or something. They take the rats out, and then they put them back in. Instead of giving up after 50 minutes, they swam for like 48 or 72 hours straight. They didn't give up, and so the faith that they were going to be rescued drove them for days, whereas they gave up in an astonishingly fast period of time. So this is really interesting. Now, when you apply this to human psychology and business and personal success, okay, having that true faith, in something, your true belief in something, well, great. That power that you can apply to yourself, love it. Now, how do you balance that with, let's say I was 4'1", and I had knee problems, and I wanted to be an NBA star, right? It's not physically possible for that to be a thing, right?
Yeah.
No matter how much I believe it, if my knees aren't going to work, I would be a joke on the court. But some people, how do they balance that? Where, you get those American Idol kids go on there and they can't, carry a tune, and they have this false belief that they are going to be a star. So where's that balance in, you gotta properly assess how does that all work out?
I know, because can be such a cheap and easy cop out. And that's what I have a problem with. Any kind of, whether it's pop psychology or religious organizations that are just putting these easy answers out there. I think I always want to give respect and deference to the human complexities and the human condition. And so I would say, there's fantasy faith, and then there's critical thinking faith. I'm a fan of critical thinking faith, because whether I walk into a group, whether it's political minded, religious minded, or philosophically minded or something, do not check your critical thinking at the door. That's what cults want us to do, right?
Yes.
They want us to believe in fantasy faith. They are God. They have the whole omnipresence in the world, and we just need to follow them. And if you study cult-like behavior, it's people learning mind control and saying, just check your critical thinking at the door and trust me. I have your clarity and your confidence and courage, and only I hold it. Well, that's a godlike complex. And yet we do it in a lot of circles. So once you start really seeing faith with a critical thinking aspect, you're still a human being with a brain. You get to engage your critical thinking with your faith. You don't check your critical thinking at the door. And
that's nice.
Oftentimes people will be a beautiful mirror to us. I have a husband of 30 years. If my fantasy faith sounds a little off and I start moving into fantasy faith, my husband might go, I'm not sure that's really good critical thinking on that. We have beautiful people in our life to help gently remind us and hold a mirror up if our thinking feels a little off, because all of us can be subjected to, if I believe it, it will come. I can manifest it. We can feel subjected to that because we might have had success in one of these areas. And so that we think that, I manifested this, I can do it again. I'm like, now we're drifting from critical thinking faith to more of a fantasy faith. And you've let go of a critical thinking thing and just want to do more of a mind control. Like you're trying to control the universe, you're trying to control others, you're trying to control some other higher power. You're not capable of that.
And no, I love it. And I think that's spot on. It's that critical thinking part where I think all too often people are happy to lie to themselves and lie to others. And they want things to be different. I want for it to be this way. And you take a look at like Steve Jobs's, reality distortion theory, or power, his reality distortion. He could tell people things that weren't, real. And with enough hard work, they made it into something that they created a new reality. That's a really hard thing to do. It took a lot of people. That takes a lot of resources and a lot of belief on his part and a lot of disbelief on a lot of their part from the way the stories go. But it's really interesting to see that, and it'd be interesting to find out if he actually understood the limits, and if he actually understood that it was beyond, or if it was just that, look, critically thinking, it might be a little bit beyond, but I have faith in my people. They can do this. Even though nobody's ever gone this far, I believe with enough motivation, our people can do it. And I think going back to what you said, I love how you put it, the critical thinking faith. I think that's perfect. And I would bet you that that's probably what Steve Jobs implemented with his reality distortion. Was he actually critically assessed all of it. He was no dummy, and he didn't really believe in, frou, I will manifest the iPhone out of thin air, just sit on the couch and it will appear. That didn't happen. Right.
Yeah.
So I really love that critical. Yeah, that's really what too many people lack, isn't it?
Right. And it keeps you out of the danger zone. It serves as kind of some bumper pads for you to not just drift over. I'm 5'3". I'm not going to be a basketball professional player. So why would I even drift over into that lane? What I want to do is stay in really where my focus of potential and engage my faith in a critical thinking way. But there's a myriad of options of how I get to spend this one life instead of focusing on something that's just a fantasy faith.
Well, and I love that because it goes back to what you talk about in the book in finding what drives and fuels you. And I really like that. Can you go a little bit into it? Because while you do in the book, for those who haven't read it yet, what is your take and kind of perspective on that? Because I think it flows nicely here into this. How do you find what drives and fuels you?
Yeah, I have a conversation just fresh in my mind before we got on this call today. I was sitting with a CEO and a COO, and as I was listening to them talk, I was so proud of him, the COO, speaking up to the CEO, and he said, "I'm not feeling fulfilled in my job." And we were all sitting in the meeting together, and I said, "That's a courageous thing to say." But it showed the trust he had in his supervisor, the CEO of the company. And she turned to him and said, "I'm so glad you said that because I want to know what you need to feel fulfilled." And he said, "I don't know." And as I'm listening to it as the coach, because that's what I do, I work with these triads and quads and coaching groups. I go, "I can totally see what it is. I can see what the block is." He is telling himself a belief that says, I can't fulfilled in my job because there's too many other things I have to do that doesn't let me do what I actually love. And I said that out loud. And I go, might this be something you're believing? And they know my coaching style. So they all started laughing. They're like, "Oh, here she goes. She's going into the false beliefs and true beliefs. She's going to call us on it, And I jokingly say, "Hey, listen, you get to call me at any point." And I've had clients say, "Heather, that sounds like a false belief." So we all have it. But I was able to step into that space and say, do you think that you're holding your own self back and creating your own barrier to letting yourself enjoy your job? And he goes, "Yeah, that totally resonates." Why? Because he had a high level of responsibility, high level of initiative. He needed a supervisor to say, you get to love your job and you get to enjoy what you do and you get to feel fulfilled. So then as a coach, I stepped in that space and I said, okay, in your next check-in, ask him 3 things that drains him, supervisor. And you, VP, or the CEO, excuse me, the COO, you tell her not only 3 things that drain you, but tell her something that energizes you. Because now we get to grow the clarity and you get to start really engaging a true belief that says, I get to enjoy my job versus I have to do what I hate because no one else is going to do it.
I love that. And I think that happens so much for smaller businesses. There are, and it's something you have to balance. And, I think Mike Tyson, famously said, success is doing what you hate doing, but doing it like you love it. And when I get it. And that's true to some degree, but at some point when you're working at higher levels, when it is no longer just, hey, look, I don't really like, speed bag work, but you do it until you're so good at it that you do love it. And he makes a really great point. it's funny how eloquent a guy like Mike Tyson can actually be.
Yeah.
But it's true to some degree when you get very good at a task, you enjoy doing that task. So there is that balance, but really being able to identify and have leadership, communicate in, hey, look, I'm not enjoying this is where and I think people now would say they would not say anything until they felt burnt out, right? And now they're like,
Right.
oh, I'm burnt out. And now
Yes.
they just don't enjoy work anymore. And now they're like, I probably need a career change, or maybe I'm just burnt out. And I'm just going to kind of quietly quit, over the next few years until I find something else or retire.
Yeah.
And
Just make peace with my job misery.
yeah, and it's just and I won't really care that much, and so I won't really excel at work, and I'll just kind of work for the weekends, right? Work for my family, and not really enjoy the 8 hours plus a day that I'm at work. So I love that you have. So you take these. I mean, that's just a brilliant example. I mean, how often do you don't see that in the business world? Normally, people are very
Right.
busy. If they have a meeting, it's certainly not to talk about somebody's feelings about their job nearly often enough, right? And
Right.
not to
Well,
kind of is that the problem that younger kids have now with some of the older, as they would say,
yeah.
boomers and Gen Xers, is that we tend to be like, look, you got to go to work.
Yeah.
You should enjoy your work, go to work. But they want to focus more on what fulfills them. And are they then wrong for looking outside of work? Like, I don't need to work to get fulfillment. And then you're saying, look, you can find it in work, right?
Yeah. So I'm so glad you brought that up because we have two ends of the continuum here. So this example I just mentioned to you, they're in their middle age, 40s, 50s, running a very high powered company and, huge pressure on bottom line. And so fortunately, this is the kind of culture that brings people like me in because I get to hold that human factor and I get to check job fulfillment and they value it and they let me sit in the meetings and check beliefs. And so these are the kind of companies that I really work well with and leaders that I work well with because they open themselves up to that human factor side while they're feeling the pressure of that bottom line. And I support that because I believe the bottom line is so important and I get it, but it's a human factor. It's not just getting to the bottom line. It's how we get there that matters. So the companies that hold that value are the ones that I'm a really good fit for because I do challenge the beliefs to slow it down and says, I truly believe every person gets to enjoy their job. Do they get to enjoy it 100% of the time? No. So some of the newer generation loves to come in and say, I'm only feeling 90% job fulfillment. And I go, that is wonderful.
Okay, that's great.
Yes. The actual percentage I usually hold is a 60-40. It's like 60% of the time we get to really love what we do. And 40% of the time we got to do the stuff like pay the bills, pay the taxes, and show up for life and adult. So as I work with the newer generation, I gently have to help them shift that percentage down to, oh yeah, you know what? 40% of the time you're not gonna like your job. And that's part of really what works. Our hope is that you keep it over around 60%. With my older generation I work with, I have to help them say, hey, 60% of the time you can enjoy your job. And some of them are just running and gunning and pushing. And then they're wondering why they're miserable. And it's that wonderful honesty. And like I said, it's that courage to slow down and say, I'm having a hard time finding fulfillment. But I work with company cultures that make it safe to ask that so that we can grapple with it and make sure that we increase it. Because I truly believe all of us in that room, if we're committed to that, our collective clarity will go up. I just have to ask the question. Everyone's smart enough to start owning their own clarity of why they're not feeling fulfilled and really start assessing that. But we have to make it safe enough to actually address that. And then we have to use critical thinking, not the fantasy, the critical thinking that says, well, where are we at? We need to hit around a 60% average. And I've worked in other situations too, where I'm like, oh, you don't like the fact that you have to come on Fridays. Okay, let's back up a minute. Because you're not feeling fulfilled because you want to have a 3-day work week. Okay, we have to reset expectations there. And I do see a little bit of that two ends of the continuum. I'm working with more of the newer place. And I don't mean to put down the newer generation because I think sometimes they're people like to make fun of them, of the snowflake or the cupcake generation. I want to say they're daring to ask about life fulfillment. And I'm proud of them for doing that. and they're challenging our older generation that has just grinded through and really not very fulfilled, but just did their job, but they're kind of miserable. And to be able to start trying to find that balance, I love to encourage both ends of the spectrum and the generations to work together, because we really have something to learn from each other. The younger generation can really learn from really just some good grit and getting scrappy and doing your job. The older generation can start really learning from the younger generation that says, you know what, you actually get to have a quality of life and you get to find fulfillment, probably new levels that you've never experienced before.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's really funny how every generation, as far back as we in modern history, they've always thought the next generation was just the worst. And it's so funny. They're like, oh, we're headed for disaster. We're going off a cliff. And every time the next generation improved and made things better. But that generation was like, no, not these dummies. They're gonna ruin everything. Because they're lazy, they're long-haired hippies, they're just the worst, whatever it was. And
which is a false belief, Matthew.
It's a false belief. That's right. I love it.
So that's where I do confidently say that's a false belief, because no generation can carry that kind of oppressive mantle of we're going to be failed and doomed. It's not even critical thinking. So that one I can confidently say, oh, that's a false belief. Once we start labeling a generation as dooming us.
Yeah, for sure. Well, ourselves. I think you hinted at you've got another book coming out, right?
Yes.
Called Grace Space. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Can you tell us what that's going to be about, and when we can expect to see that hit the shelves?
Yes. Okay. So just for a little context for the audience, the life you're made for is really this. I would encourage almost a 3-month experience of reading this book, doing an e-course with it. I have an e-course on my website, and a coaching companion. It's really for self-reflection, because I truly believe that leadership starts from within. We can only lead people how we can lead ourselves. And so the more you can grow your own clarity, confidence, and courage, you want to spend time in that. So that book is really meant for more of this personal journey to take and feel like you're coaching yourself, or working with a coach in it. A lot of coaches are starting to buy my book and my materials to use it in coaching. The new book that I have coming out, and so my point with that is it's a pretty meaty read. I'm impressed if you read the whole thing, Matthew.
Yeah, no, it's substantial. It is.
Yes.
I don't know if you can tell,
yes.
but I think all total, with notes, 380 pages. But
yes.
And it is not large font. It is not light reading. It is it's significant. It is a significant book that really has a lot of information that takes time to digest. And a lot of it is like, oh yeah, of course, I agree. Yeah. And it's really good. And it's great to see that in one place in the structure that you provided. So now, but yes, to your point, significant.
So I guess I want to be real clear on that. And wherever you're at in your life, I respect whether you have time and you're really like, I just need to take some space and time. I would say give yourself 3 months, read a chapter a week, let yourself chew on it, respond to it in the coaching companion, maybe get the e-course. That's like to take a journey. The second book, I realized a lot of corporate America is not reading. So this one's under 10,000 words. And I thought, I want all my people that I work with to feel very successful reading my book and feel like I could finish this in a day. You can finish Grace Space in a day. And that's my new book. And it's the first in a series called 3C Living and Leading series. And so this is a little bit more of to grab onto a topic. And it's this idea that it's 7 practices in there. And it's based off this idea that we can all carry spaces of grace around with us, whether it's in our homes or in our company cultures or wherever we work and live and lead. We can choose to offer spaces of grace. And I kind of built off of this idea of safe space, which I love. We need to have safe spaces in our world. But when I started working with humanity and different groups, I started seeing, well, then we all clustered over to our safe spaces and kind of threw grenades over to other people's safe spaces. And I'm like, I don't think this is serving the purpose that we'd like it to serve. So how about we build on this idea of safe space and create spaces of grace, which is really the definition of grace is to be considerate and offer goodwill. And so, for instance, the first practice is responding versus reacting. The second practice is questioning versus accusing. But it's this idea that you can choose whatever you want. I can choose to stay curious and actually question someone. Hey, let me check something with you. I mean, I think there might be a misunderstanding here, and I felt myself getting a little defensive. Can I check something with you? That's staying curious and questioning it. Or I can jump straight to accusing and say, you meant to say that, and you meant to put me down in front of my superior, and you meant to humiliate me. Wow, that's a totally different awareness. And what I began to realize in my work with humanity is I don't think people realized they had the power to stop and choose. If you just take a second to choose, do I want to be questioning or do I want to be accusing? Do I want to be receptive? Do I want to be defensive? So I juxtapose it with the antithesis of it so that you can see you always have a choice. Our goal is to live a little bit more on the left side of the column, which is questioning, responding, freedom, truth. These are some of the practices we want to do. And we're not perfect. And sometimes we're going to flip over to the other side of it, but starting to see that we do not have to be a victim in the world that we live in or to someone else choosing maybe to be much more reactive to us than responsive, or maybe to be accusing. Even when people accuse me, I'll slow it down and I'll say, I'd like to question that for a minute. If they're open to it, it slows the whole conversation down and we can actually have a conversation. If they're not open to it, then the conversation's over and I'm not going to sit there and keep getting accused. So I'll just step out of it. But it helps you realize none of us have to be a victim like we are to many of our emotions that we are struggling with. And I think that's really prevalent in our work, in all our spaces right now that I'm watching.
Wow. I love that. I completely agree with the whole safe space problem. And as soon as I heard gray space, and earlier before we started talking, before the interview, we had discussed it. And when you were talking about the CEO and the COO and the space that she had created, that where it was gracious enough for the COO to feel comfortable saying that, I was like, oh, and I have to think, was that something they already did, or was that did you introduce them to this idea of gray space? And then so they all felt comfortable saying this without it being like one of these things where it's like, well, I got to get a new freaking COO because this one is, too, right?
I had worked with this company and actually introduced the idea of gray space. It's where I piloted about 2 years ago, and it was so successful. And the CEO of the company said, we are going to be a culture of gray space. And so it's their culture now. And then I thought, well, I'm going to write a book off it. And it's already taking off. And I've had people, even presidents and C-suite teams, looking at just the title of the book. And I've had them contact me saying, we are a space of grace. And I start teasing them going, have you even read my book? Like, read my book first, But I also made it simple read because I'm like, don't worry, it won't take you 3 months to sit down and read it. You really could finish it in a day. And I did it auditory too. So I have it recorded with my own voice. But it's really off of this idea. It's a historical event that really got me thinking about it on World War I, where both sides were fighting each other. And it was around Christmas time. And many of you have probably heard this story it's a book called A Silent Night that was written. And some of the Germans started putting up Christmas trees. And by the time Christmas time came, they started lobbying gifts back and forth to each other until pretty soon, the day of Christmas, they actually met in no man's land where they celebrated Christmas together and exchanged gifts. And then after Christmas on 26th, they wouldn't fight each other. They had to bring in fresh troops because they started shooting over each other's head. And I think I've always loved that story because somebody there decided, I want to create a gray space in a place of war. And yet someone had the tenacity, the fortitude, the courage, the grace to say, I am still a human being and I choose my own way of what I'm bringing to this space. And it still gives me chills just thinking about that story and who was that brave soul that started it and became a ripple effect. And to the point where people then decided they wanted to join. And I think that's what we have lost sometimes. Humanity is starving for spaces of grace, and it only takes one of us to do it. And so this book is really about, you could be that one person. You may be the president. You may be the mother in your home. You may be a barista at Starbucks. You may be anything. And you can choose how you're going to carry a space of grace around with you. And that's where you really will find your power.
I love that. Okay. When is this coming up?
Well, this is coming up mid-January. It's at the presses now. I'm a self-published author, so I'm working with my team, and I just got all my endorsements in. I've got I don't know if some of you have heard about Ken Blanchard. He's a great leadership guru, and Bob Goff. I've gotten some big names to just endorse this idea of gray space, and that's coming out mid-January, and it will be in ebook, audiobook, and a print on Amazon.
Well, I would love to have you come back on the Cyber Business Podcast to discuss it. So as soon as it comes out, I will.
Okay.
I will be ordering it, and I would love for you to come back on and talk about it. I'm going to go on the record right now and say I think we're going to see gray space be a term that everybody is using, and a concept that is just ubiquitous. I think it's going to I think it's going to catch fire. I mean, it makes
Matthew.
Perfect sense. It is what we've been missing for the longest time. It brings so many different ideas together. So just eloquently in such an easy and I understand why a CEO is going to say, "Oh yeah, I know, I get it. We want great," because you get it. Just the phrase alone tells you so much, and you can infer so much just from it. I think you struck gold here. Oil, whatever you will. I cannot wait to read the book. I'm sure it's going to be great. But yes, please, if you would, I'd love to have you back on the show. I think it's going to be fantastic. Really looking forward to it. Mid-January, the book's coming out. Feel free to email me or check in with me, and I'll make sure you got all the details as it's coming up. I'll be there. We'll talk about it on LinkedIn. We'll drive people there. I think it's going to be great.
Thanks, Matthew.
Oh, Heather, thank you. This has been fantastic. If you could, before we head out, because I'm really looking forward to the next interview, tell people where they can find out more about your current book and your next book, Gray Space. And please.
Yes. So the easiest place to start is just my website, heatherpenny.com. And then on there, you'll see all the links to where to buy my books, my resources. I do a weekly blog if you want to sign up for that, with a coaching blog. And then I've got a podcast, but heatherpenny.com is really where I house everything. And then you could decide. I give a lot of stuff for free. My team gets mad at me, but I give a lot of it out for free. And then you can also see where to just buy some of my products if you want to, and also utilize my services as a keynote and a workshop leader and all that good stuff.
Love it. Heather, thanks for coming on. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the listeners. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.